Thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's webinar. We will get started momentarily. Thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's webinar on networking your way into the boardroom. My name is Kelsey Velma, and I'll be your technical moderator behind the scenes. I am the Director of Programs and Operations here at DirectWomen, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping notes. You should all be able to see the screen right now and hear my voice. Attendees, however, are muted, so although all of you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom console, not the raise hand or chat features. Feel free to submit questions at any time throughout today's program. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour with 45 minutes of content, followed by a few minutes for Q&A. Links to our speakers' biographies will be provided in the chat once the program has begun. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you will complete. It is 4 questions and should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes tops. With that, I will turn it over to the moderator of today's program, Andrea Zapp. Andy?
Thanks, Kelsey. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Zapp, and I'll be the moderator, have the privilege of being the moderator for today's discussion. I am currently the managing partner at Cleveland Avenue, which is an investment firm here in Chicago, and I lead our work investing in and supporting minority and women entrepreneurs and businesses. I am also a 2021 alumni of the DirectWomen Board Institute and a member of the DirectWomen Board of Directors. For more than 15 years, DirectWomen has focused on fulfilling its mission to increase the representation of women attorneys on boards. Our work includes identifying highly qualified women attorneys and helping them position themselves for board work. We also have programming that helps to create a pipeline of women attorneys who can effectively serve in the corporate boardrooms. And we also serve as a resource for companies seeking qualified women board candidates. I am really thrilled today. We have a great panel for you, and I'm pleased to have Deneen Donnelly, Rachel Stern, and Allison Leopold-Tilley here with me today. Deneen is Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Consolidated Edison. She currently serves on the board of M1 Financial and is a 2017 alumna of the DirectWomen Board Institute. Welcome, Deneen. Rachel is Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Global Head of Strategic Resources at FactSet. She currently serves on the boards of Barron Capital Management, Inc. and Morrow Sodali. Rachel is a 2017 alumna of the DirectWomen Board Institute. Welcome, Rachel. And Allison is a partner and managing board member at Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman, and a director of on the board of Danimer Scientific. She previously served on the board of FBR and Company and is a 2014 alumna of the DirectWomen Board Institute. Welcome all. I look forward to joining our discussion. All right, let's get started. So I want to start by having everybody tell a little bit about their board journey and how you got on your first corporate board. So we're going to start with you, Allison.
Thank you, Andy, and hello, everyone. I do want to first take a moment. I am the class of 2014, and you probably saw in the newsletter this week that Carol Robles Roman from my class passed away. And really hit me hard when I saw that. I met her through DirectWomen. The relationships we make through this organization are very strong, and she was an amazing woman. So wanted to give my thoughts on that. On a happier note, and I apologize for my voice, I'm getting over a cold. How did I get my first board? Well, I joined DirectWomen. I had to apply, I think, twice before they let me in. And then I participated in the program and I learned a lot. Really learned how to think about being a board member versus being a partner in a law firm. Pitching my M&A abilities are very different than pitching myself as a board member. So it was a great experience. I learned a lot. And DirectWomen really helped me get my first board role. It was probably about 2 years after my class. Someone reached out to DirectWomen. They were looking for a new director. They wanted a woman on the board, and I put my name in the hat, and I ended up being selected after going through a very long process. I'm sure many of you know who have been on boards. Boards are not the quickest necessarily in their recruiting. I see that a lot with my clients. I'm always trying to push them along because they take so long to get things done. But I ended up joining the board of FBR, which was a public investment bank. And the fact that my abilities leading a professional services firm and leading the compensation committee of Pillsbury was particularly interested to them, because compensation is very important in investment banking, made me interesting to them. I joined the board. A month later, an activist launched a proxy fight. We had a big proxy battle. They tried to unseat several board members and we won. Very exciting. It was very interesting for me to be on the other side of that after having been on the side as a lawyer. Then we were a day away from signing an acquisition and we got an offer to be purchased and we ended up being sold. So it was an amazing 1-year whirlwind. I learned an incredible amount of things, and my service as a board member of FBR was over. So it was both exciting and sad. And I'm now on the board of Dynamo Scientific, which is a biodegradable plastic company. But I will save the story of how I got that board a little later because it fits into this topic.
Okay, thank you. Next, Deneen, would you like to go next?
Sure.
About your first board experience?
Sure, happy to. So I would say it had been in the back of my mind for a while, the possibility of board service, and that's from being in boardrooms as general counsel and secretary. When I became CLO at USAA, it was a conversation that I had, and so I started to take steps to prepare for it. So I attended Directors Academy in 2016 out in California. I was part of DirectWomen Institute in 2017. I did the NACD Masterclass, became a fellow. Lots of learnings, but even more important for each of those, building my network. I believe in telling people what you want. So I would tell people when they would say, you know, what are you thinking about? I would tell people, you know, I'm interested in serving on a board. I have this great job, but this is something else that I would like to do. In 2021 or thereabouts, I started to receive calls about public and private company boards, and interviewed for, I guess, a few. And M1 Finance came up, and that is in the fintech space. After having moved from financial services, it was no longer a conflict. And so for me, it was an opportunity to do something near and dear to the heart that sounded very interesting, with a company that had a large trajectory in front of it. So I joined that board in February of 2022.
Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rachel, you want to go next?
Sure, happy to. So first of all, thanks so much for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be among all of you. I think my path to the first board was perhaps a little bit charmed in some ways. I served as head of investor relations for FactSet. So in addition to being chief legal officer, head of strategic resources, back when the company was a little smaller, my responsibilities included investor relations. And so I met the head of a private company that's a mutual fund complex that was an investor in FactSet, and had known them for about 10 years when the founder asked me to join that private company board. I liked the company, I liked the people. It was a little bit complicated though, and this is, I mention it because it's something for people to think about. Because the company's funds were a large shareholder of FactSet stock. And I should say FactSet is a financial information services company. We compete with Bloomberg, Refinitiv. So I consulted with outside counsel to determine that there was no conflict, and agreed with the board when they approved my ability to serve on this board that I would recuse myself from any contract negotiations, because Barron Capital was also a client. So there were lots of different connections to this company, and it's been a pleasure to serve on that board since, I want to say, April of 2018.
Wow, terrific. Well, lots of connections, and we will circle back to some of the points that some of the panelists made. I do just want to note, Allison, you and I share my very first board was a public company called Andrew Corporation that I got invited to interview for the board by one of my partners at the time. I was a partner at a firm called Sun and Shine Nath and Rosenthal. That's now called Denton's. It's merged with Denton's. And one of my partners did some legal work for Andrew, and they were specifically looking for a lawyer, and he asked if I would be interested. And so I got that relationship. But what made me, Allison, relate to what you were saying is that very shortly after that, we had a big proxy fight of our own, and an acquisition that was we fought against and had to go through a whole poison pill thing. And it was, and at the time, what was interesting about it was, I think that I don't think my fellow board members at the time appreciated how much they were happy to have a lawyer in the boardroom with them, as opposed to on the outside. So it was, and we too, shortly after that, got acquired. So it was a short term on the board, but I learned an awful lot during that time. So Allison, let me just go with you. You had to find a second board after that first one. What oh, you didn't have to, but you did successfully. Did you use your network to do that? And if so, how did you activate your network to let people know after your first board that you were interested in a second?
Yeah, so I didn't do anything right away. I kept thinking about it and not getting around to it. And then I really started telling people that I was interested in it. And I think, say activating my network. I think sometimes we can spend too much time trying to figure out, who is the right person for me to ask. And you never know. You never know where the opportunities are going to come from. I like to tell people a story of a company I sold, and there were 3 founders. One founder went to work for the buyer. One founder decided to retire and bike ride all the time. And one founder became a VC. And you would say, well, which founder do you think sent me the most work over the years? Well, the founder who went bike riding. Go figure, And if I'd had to sit there and say, which of these 3 people is most likely to send me clients, he's not the one I would have guessed. So I try and remember that, and remember that you never know where opportunities are going to come from. And you share your vision with people, and you let them know you're interested, because a lot of people say, oh, I didn't think you had any time to be a director, or I didn't know that was something you were interested in. And the way I actually found the Danimer role is the CEO of FBR. He originally went to the acquirer of FBR, and then he went and he started a PE fund. And I was talking to him and one of his colleagues who had also come from FBR, and I was actually trying to pitch them to get their work. And then at the end of the call, I said, oh, and by the way, if any of your portfolio companies are looking for directors, I'm looking for another position. And about 9 months later, they called me up, and a company they had invested in that went public, that they were on the board of, was looking for a new director, and it was Danimer. And I ended up being in the hunt and securing the position. And that was another one where they talked to me, and it seemed like it went really well. And then I followed up, and they said, oh, we decided to put the board search on hold. We'll get back to you in 6 months. And then they called me like 2 months later and said, oh, we don't want to have the board search on hold. We want to move really quickly. Are you still interested? So, it was just keeping my name out there, telling people who might have opportunities. And then in a more directed fashion, I do make a list as names come to me of people who might know of board positions. And every now and then I'll maybe send out my resume and they say, hey, how are you doing? Just want you to know that I'm looking for a board seat. If you come across anything, let me know. Because I think, having sat in thousands of board meetings at this point, I've been doing this a long time. Even though the companies all hire headhunters, still so many board seats are found through the network of the directors. And in fact, I find that a lot of headhunters are still biased against lawyers. When FBR was sold, I called up the recruiting firm that placed me on the FBR board, and I said, I'm looking. And they told me all the reasons why lawyers are really hard to place. And I thought, you literally got paid for placing me a year ago, but you're not even willing to try again. So I think we have to look in a little less likely places.
Yeah, I think a really important point, and why we're having this conversation, one of the reasons we're having this conversation today about the importance of networking. But you said something, and Deneen, you said, echoed something Deneen said earlier, the echo, and I want to follow up with Deneen. And you said, you know, you told people, you talked to the former CEO of FBR. And Deneen, you said that in your opening remarks. You said you had no problems telling people what you want. So can you talk a little bit about, because sometimes we do. Some of us don't want to just run up to people and go, hey, I'm interested in a board. Can you talk a little bit about how you shared with people and your desire to get on a board, and did that in a way that, you know, didn't necessarily alienate people?
So I would say these are not cold calls, right? These are people within your network who you have other dealings with. And I was not asking them for action. This is simply part of the conversation. Here's what I'm interested in. And I'd usually kind of close the loop. And if you hear about something that you think would be a good fit for me, please feel free to share my profile or to let me know. So I didn't have a particular ask. But as part of relationship building, you know, I'm always asking people kind of, well, and what do you want to do next? I felt comfortable telling people that this was something I wanted to pursue. And I would say it was with a really broad group of people. So with recruiters, and I would say recruiters who were not, say, actively pitching me for business at the time, because I was dealing with executive and board recruiting. But I'd be comfortable once we have a relationship saying, and by the way, here is something that I'm interested in pursuing. And if you hear about something, please keep me in mind. And so if you don't tell people, it's hard for them to guess. And I think when you're particularly not asking them to do something other than keeping you in mind, that's a relatively easy conversation. Um, on the flip side, I try to do the same thing for others when they tell me that they're interested. But that really was my approach to, I would say, spreading the word in dealing with the various groups that I was a member of, and telling people what it was that I was interested in.
Right. So you made a good point there that it's typically not a cold call.
Yes.
And so Rachel, how about you when you're letting people know about your interest? I mean, the board you talked about, some people you had a relationship with and came out of there, but in other searches, have you let a broader group of people know, you know, you're interested, and how do you go about doing that?
Absolutely. So, you know, for me, it's just been conversations with friends, conversations over dinner. You know, you talk about your kids a little bit. My kids are older, so, you know, talk about your kids a little bit. You talk about your jobs. And, you know, I had no shame or compunction about saying, hey, you know, some of my friends and their husbands, you know, the families are involved in business. And I'd say, you know, I feel like I'm at that stage of my life where I'm, you know, ready to join a board. And you know, it's like Allison and Deneen have said, it sits for a while. You're not going to get a phone call, you know, the next morning, Sunday morning after a Saturday night dinner, and someone says, oh, hey, you know, I've got the board for you. But I will tell you that the second board that I joined came, it is, Marmo Sodali is a TPG growth company. So it's a private equity company. And we had, my husband and I had dinner with some dear friends, and the wife knew that I was interested in joining a board, and she called her son, who was one of the folks working on this portfolio company that TPG was about to buy. And they have made a concerted effort to get independent directors on the board and to get diversity on their boards. And so she called up her son and said, hey, Max, go call Rachel. And I've known this kid, you know, since he was 10. And, you know, he's the reason, and his mother, they're the reason why I joined this second board. Now, you know, don't get me wrong. Again, as Allison and Deneen have said, even though you have these relationships, you're still going to be vetted, right? They would not have had me on the board had I not had the experience and been able to contribute in a way that was useful. You know, same as Deneen, in some ways, I've been in every board meeting and just about every committee meeting for FactSet since January of 2001. That's a lot of experience. And I think that the folks at Morrow Sodali were interested in having somebody who had not only the legal experience, because it is a proxy solicitation firm, but also someone who had the operational experience that I've had. So that's been really fun. And, you know, that's why I say you never know where your next phone call is going to come from. So there's nothing wrong with letting people know that you're interested.
Right. Not only letting them know, but you know, it's important, because I think Deneen said if they don't know, they can't help you. And I found that many people want to help you. You know, people want to touch base with you. But you touched on something that Allison touched on as well, which is both sometimes the process can be long and detailed. Allison, can you talk about how you don't get discouraged in a lengthy process, or when you do an interview and then they don't call you back, and you know, how do you manage to keep engaged and keep yourself going?
Well, I think it depends on how long it is, but it can be hard. And I think first of all, you have to accept that for every one board seat, they often interview a lot of wonderful people. So first of all, don't take it personally. At least that's what I tell myself. Don't take it personally. And then I tried to set up kind of a reasonable cadence of following up. You know, you don't want to bug someone every week. You don't need to let 2 months go by. You can check with the headhunter. You can check with some of the board members you met. You can check with maybe whoever referred you in, and you can kind of work, you know, go to different people so you're not always following up with the same person. And if I saw anything that I thought would be of interest to them, you know, as lawyers, we come across new laws, new issues that are coming out that might be interesting to the company. So, you know, sending them, hey, our firm just put out this client alert about XYZ that might be interesting to you, you know, kind of keep in touch. Sort of, you know, it's your networking skills that work for anything. Don't forget them. And then just reminding myself, having sat on the other side, watched the boards of my clients crawl through, you know, hiring someone, just reminding myself, you know, remember that board search, it took them this long. It could be something very similar. So trying to, you know, keep your own spirits up and also do what you can to reach out. But yeah, it's hard at the end if you don't get selected. Hard not to feel a little personally upset. It's also, I think some boards are very rude and don't tell you if they don't pick you. So I try and tell my boards when I'm working with them, you know, give that person the common courtesy of letting them know if you're not picking them. Also, you know, one thing Rachel was saying about, you know, people want to help you made me think of, you should also be helping other people. You know, if you know of a board that you're not right for, suggest other people. When I sit in board meetings with my clients, if they're looking for someone, whenever I can, I will send that referral to DirectWomen so they can see if there's anyone in the DirectWomen network who would fit. So I think all of us helping each other, because we should want to help each other, and then also will help all of us.
Right. So that is a perfect segue for me to circle back to Rachel and just ask her, because I know, Rachel, you have a couple of actually very great stories about helping others get on board. And I think Allison's point, you know, and I'm sure Deneen would agree with this as well, is it is, you know, it is networking, and we're part of other people's networks. So when we have the opportunity, we should help. But I know you've done that. Can you tell us a little bit about your stories?
Yeah, sure. So Andy, you know, at this point, my dance card is full. At my company, I was the first person to be on a board and, you know, got our board approval, and I'm maxed out at 2. So sometimes I'll get phone calls, and even before I was on my second board, you get phone calls for a company that just isn't a fit for you. Or, you know, there was one company where I really wanted to be on the board and I couldn't because my husband's job would have created a conflict. So in that first instance, and it was really a peach assignment. It was a public company board. It was fun, interesting, great people. The meetings were in Florida. I really wanted to do it, but I couldn't. So I called up a dear friend of mine and I will say her name is Nichelle Maynard Elliott. I think she's fabulous. It was her first board. She had recently finished working for a company and was looking for the next chapter. She joined that board. She's now on the board of Xerox and I want to say Lucid Motors. And she started her own consulting company. So this really opened up a new chapter for her. And as Allison mentioned, I got, a call for another board that I couldn't do. And I referred the headhunter to, I should say the search firm. I referred the search firm to DirectWomen, and Carla Newell is on the board of Fluent. As a proximate, ultimately that's how it resulted. So I'm really happy for her. And, I just have to say, I am a firm advocate of women in business and women on boards. If there's, a board role that I can't take, or even a job, that comes in, I will do my best to find a way to fill that spot with another woman or a person of color, preferably a woman also, So I think it's really important for us to take those opportunities that come to us and not just flick them away, but really think about a useful way to plant the seed for that firm or person to find somebody else that furthers women in business and on boards.
Yeah, it's great stories and great use of DirectWomen. You mentioned Rachel mentioned, Deneen, that she was the first in her company to get on a board, and then her company has a policy about it. How about, does Con Ed have a policy about board service, or did you talk to your CEO or your board before you went off on your board search? How did you handle that?
So Con Ed does not have a policy, and until I went on a board, none of the senior executives served on boards, including the CEO. So when I came in, I was, and I did not negotiate the ability to do so on my way in because I wasn't on a board at the time. When I came in, I certainly let the CEO know that this was something I was interested in. But because I had jumped industries from financial services to utilities, I said, you know what, I want to kind of, get my feet wet, really, wrap my arms around this job, but just know this is something I'm interested in. Within about a year and a couple of months, there was CEO turnover. And so the new CEO and I had a very frank conversation. And I said, I had this conversation with prior CEO. This is what I'm interested in. And in fact, I advocated for board service for senior leaders, particularly those who could become CEO one day. I think that it would be very helpful for people who have only seen one company's governance to be exposed to other companies. So it wasn't just, I want to do this, and I did. But by the way, I think you should think about this as a growth opportunity for others. So we had the conversation, and then probably within a couple of months, I started getting phone calls. So we would have the conversation each time I was being considered. I think he was open in part because my background is just very different than most of the others, who are really, I'd say, engineers, right? Engineers at heart, operational people. And I had demonstrated the ability to do a number of different things. And so I simply kept him close during my search so that he wanted to be the person to talk to the board. So he did that. He would make them aware if I was interviewing with a public company. He made them aware ultimately when I was interviewing with M1 and eventually joined. And it's been a very good conversation. We've talked about whether, is one board the right thing? Do you have time and capacity? We've not landed on that yet, but I like the fact that there is openness and willingness to consider, so long as he reminds me, Con Ed comes first.
Yeah, right. And you made a great point in there about board service for executives. I totally agree. As I mentioned to you earlier, I was I was the chief human resources officer at Exelon, which is a big power company here in Chicago. And there, we actually ultimately developed with the CEO, a policy to encourage our senior executive team to get on board. And then we retained a firm here in Chicago, run by a gentleman named James Drury, who was just starting at the time. He's now turned it into a huge practice of placing people on boards, because I think more and more companies are recognizing that it is a strong developmental strength for their executives to be on, to learn governance, board for governance, and all those things you learn from being on a board. So it's a great point. And for those of you who are in-house, something for you to talk about with your CEOs, because I think it's a strong argument to be made to support you and your board searches.
So I do have a comment on that. So prior to Con Ed, when I was at USAA, I did work with the CEO and the board on a policy that would allow senior executives to serve on boards. They then focused on people being exposed to governance training, such as NACD. And so there certainly was a recognition that skills would be enhanced by external board service, in addition to the nonprofit work.
Right. And Allison, how about you in the firm? Was there a process at the firm for board service? Did you have to, you're a member of the managing board. Did you have to clear it with your other managing board members?
So when I first joined the FBR board, I talked to the chair of the firm at the time, and he was very supportive of it. I think it's really a good thing for lawyers to be, law firm partners, to be on boards, because it really helps us understand our clients and understand what they're going through and understand their businesses in a different way. But it's also, as Rachel said, there's conflicts. You have to, work your way through. If they're a big client of the firm, then could you be an independent director? And should you recuse yourself from stuff and things like that? We also make the company sign something acknowledging, for instance, for me, they had to say they understood I was joining them as a director. I was not, nor would I ever give them legal advice. They have a law firm, but we made them sign something to make it very clear. So that was the process when I went on the first board. And then when I went on the Danimer board, I just did it because I thought it was okay. And then our PRC, which is it's our professional responsibility committee, not the People's Republic of China. They saw that I was on a board and they sent me this thing to fill out. And part of the questions were, who did you get approval from? And it was like, well, no one. I thought it was okay. I've already been on a board, but the management of the firm had changed. So in that instance, I ended up, what do they say, begging forgiveness rather than asking permission, because I'd already accepted, I was already on the board. But I did work with the new chair of the firm and managing partner to explain, because at first, I guess I was the first person to not ask or ask, and kind of working through, how should we think about conflicts? What I said, well, here's this thing we had him sign before, I had him sign it this time. How do we think through it? What's okay? Why is this good for the firm? So now, once again, we allow it. As Rachel said, I probably couldn't do more than 2, because you do have that day job that you need to focus on. And I do think I have to, some of the value we do bring to these boards, we can't hide the fact that we're a lawyer. I can't hide the fact that I do M&A all day long. So if the board is talking about M&A, I have a lot of thoughts about it. But sometimes I do have to remind them, I'm saying these things as a board member, not as your lawyer. And let's go bring in the lawyers and have them give this advice.
All right. Rachel, just anything to add? I know you've had to have these conversations with your leadership different times. Anything else to add?
Yeah, so I agree with y'all that board service at an outside company can enhance an executive's capabilities within a company. I'm sure the same is for folks practicing in a law firm. I will tell you, when I approached my first CEO about doing the DirectWomen Institute, he was not supportive at all. And in fact, refused to sign my, to create a recommendation for me. His attitude was, I want you focusing 100% on FactSet. Anything else is a distraction. And no. And it wasn't until he retired and we got a new CEO. And I did it again. And I said, I'd really like to do this Direct Women Institute, and he was entirely supportive. And I think it was because he understood that I needed that external stimulation, that I wanted to get involved with things outside my company, not not in any way to undermine what I do at FactSet, but to bring more experience and more understanding to it. And we now have two other C-suite women who are on external boards. So I feel like I kind of paved the way a little bit for that. And I think that's something to consider. We as women, I think oftentimes are used to being the first to do this or the first to do that, or if not the first, then, a close second. I think it's important to continue to do that as we try and populate the boardroom, because my view about this is you have to get into the room in order to start changing the rules. And the more of us that we can get into the room, the more quickly we can change some of those rules and attitudes.
Right. It's really important. But I also think an important point about, you hit a barrier, but you didn't let that stop you. And when the barrier was removed, you went back and ran at it again. And I think that's another important thing about, board searches. We've talked a little bit about the length of the process, but I think people should just keep in mind some persistence is required. It's just, they're not, I know sometimes it feels like they're dropping like apples from the sky for other people and not for you. But the truth is it's a process and it can be challenging. I want to switch. I'm going to come back to you, Janine. I'm going to switch a little bit and just talk about the value of nonprofit, because you talked very early on about getting prepared. You took some classes, you took Direct Women Institute. Is nonprofit board service helpful? And if so, in what ways?
Well, yes. So one, just it prepares you to be, because you are a board member. The more formal the governance of the nonprofit, the more you will learn. So certainly, I had been on nonprofit boards, probably going back to early in my career as a GC. And many of them operate with a sophistication that could be similar to a board. I have a friend who's on the board of a hospital, and certainly one that prepares her incredibly well for corporate board service, but also the people that you're sitting with, you are building relationships with people who represent other companies and associations. They may be the future person who invites you on a board, because we've talked about the importance of network. The other thing is, they're part of your network. They see your abilities. So I would say actively engaging and potentially assuming a leadership role for a nonprofit chairperson, committee chair, all of that demonstrates your ability. And getting to know your fellow board members personally, I think, will make you more effective on behalf of that nonprofit, but it could also unlock other opportunities. And you can also pull them into your network when, say, your company is looking.
That's such great points about, getting engaged with your fellow board members.
It's all very personal.
Yeah, yes, it is, but it's important because you just never know. I think that, particularly because we're talking about wanting to get on boards, it's sometimes hard to say, think like if you get a real opportunity, sometimes you always want to jump at it, but not every opportunity is a right fit for you. Allison, how do you decide what's a good fit? What makes sense, and how do you say no?
Well, just a second on your prior topic.
Sure.
Another thing, Janine made a lot of really good points. And I think you can also learn from observing your fellow board members and seeing, that person was particularly effective. That person feels like they need to say something about everything, whether they have a point to make or not. I think you can get a lot of board experience by observing boards, either the board of your company, if you sit on the meetings, nonprofit boards, private company boards. And that was something that I learned a lot, I think, about how to be a good director by watching both good and bad directors in board meetings. As far as determining a particular board, I think, I mean, to be honest, I think those of us who are trying to get on a public board for your first public board, you may take any opportunity that comes along as long as it's good enough. I think to some extent you do have to get your foot in the door. But hopefully when you have some choices, I think, first of all, it has to be a company that you believe in. If they're doing something or selling a product that you really don't care about or actively dislike, you can't do that. It'll be too hard. I love the Danimer story. You know, we're hopefully saving the world with biodegradable plastic that, you know, all the straws and cups and bottles in the world, and they'll break down, you know, very quickly and not create microplastics and all. So to me, that's a very much an added plus, that it's something I'm excited and passionate about. And then you have to like the other directors. I always ask the question of each director, do you consider this a functional board or a dysfunctional board? I have seen a lot of dysfunctional boards in my life. And for some people, they might consider that a great challenge. And for other people, it's not how they want to spend their time. So I think you have to respect the people on the board and feel like for me, I have to feel like they're a functional board and to want to spend my time and participate there. And then ultimately to feel like you have something to add. I mean, I will be perfectly honest. I knew nothing about biodegradable plastics when I was, you know, approached about this board. I've learned a lot, but I do know a lot about boards and corporate governance and building a company and sales funnels and the regulatory environment and all the things that will impact them. So I felt that I had something to bring to the table. But I think if you look at something and you think, I just don't know what value I would add, we're all so busy. We all only have so much time in life. I don't think it's the right choice for you if you don't feel like, you know, there's something you can be passionate about or add value, or you can enjoy being with these people. Because when things get tough, that's when it really matters who you're sitting around the table with.
So Rachel, how about you? I know you're maxed out on your boards, but did it matter to you when you were interviewing? You know, were you were interviewing them as much as they were interviewing you, or were you just happy to have a board opportunity?
No, you know, I'll say for my first board, there wasn't really much of an interview because I knew them so well.
Right.
You know, I'd been meeting with them from an IR perspective for years and had always kept in touch, and I knew the folks and liked them. So that wasn't really an issue. I did talk with all the other directors just to get a sense of what it was like, because those I hadn't met. The second board, I met the partner who was responsible for this company, and you know, Max I'd known since he was 10. And you know, the concept that Allison raised of making sure it's something that you want to do, that you're not wasting your time. You know, for me, it's fun because although Morrow Sodali is a private company, it is owned by a private equity firm, and their goal is to grow this company. So for me, it's really fun to see how a company is intentionally grown through certain steps. And to Allison's point also, I felt that I could add value because it's a proxy solicitation firm. So there's a lot of interaction that they have with the general counsels and secretaries. So I can give a perspective from, you know, the in-house side, from the client side. So it's just, it's got to be fun. At the end of the day, we sit in so many meetings. We sit, you know, on a lot of Zoom calls. If you're not having fun, you know, although it may seem prestigious, go do something else.
Yeah, I agree. It also has to be, you also have to be, you know, in an environment where you're going to be useful. I had a colleague, an African-American woman lawyer, was interviewing for a board where she was going to be the first woman and person of color. And it was pretty clear during the process that, you know, they weren't really ready. You know, like somebody told them you need to diversify your board. So they were like, okay, we're going to diversify the board. But during the course of the process, it was pretty clear that that's all they were doing, and that her participation on the board was going to be painful for her. And as much as she wanted the opportunity, she ultimately decided to say no, because She just felt like this is not, it's a good board, but it's going to be, a part where I'm going to be feeling demeaned on a regular basis. And that doesn't seem to be productive for her. For some people, they're like, fine, trailblazer, let's go. But not everybody feels that way. I think an important point there is what's in it. How do you feel about it, really, what you were saying?
And if I may, I want to just add, one more point, which is when you go on a board, you assume potential liability. You have fiduciary duties to that company. And, so not only does it have to be something that you want to do, but it's got to be with people whom you trust. And, in a situation where you think that you will be protected. So I'm sure everyone else here, when joining a board, first asks to see the insurance policy of the company and to make sure that as a director, you are covered, and to find out whether the company had any issues that you should know about before you would join the board. So to that point, Andrea, I would say, yeah, I interviewed them because I wanted to know about their history.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to turn, we have actually quite a few questions. So I'm going to turn to a couple of them, get as many of them in as I can. One was, coming from someone who, to see whether or not boards would be interested in people who aren't in the GC role. So they're in a deputy GC role or assistant GC role, if we had thoughts about how competitive they would be if they were GC of a business or legal unit, or as opposed to the chief legal officer. Anyone have thoughts about that?
So I have a perspective, and that's really me sitting on the GC side, right, helping to recruit on behalf of a board. I would say if they are, say, division GC or line of business GC of a large company, that could make the person attractive and interesting depending on what it is that they've done. But I wouldn't say I commonly would see other than the GC on the candidate list. But I do think there is that opportunity for people who truly have very large, complex, strategic jobs to make the case, and to be honest, for us to consider them, because they would be great board members.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's kind of what you're doing in your role as a deputy GC, but many of the people in deputy GC roles have bigger responsibilities and teams and roles than some general counsel. So I think it's less about the title, to what you're saying, and about what you're doing and how you're doing it. So it's a great point. We also have a question about going back to some of the things we talked about with recruiters and how sometimes they're not always great with lawyers. Someone asked about what's the pitch if you're, as a lawyer, how do you frame your pitch? Allison, I'm going to throw this to you. How do you frame your pitch what do you put in your elevator speech to get people over the hurdle? You're just a lawyer.
Well, I think DirectWomen is really great at that, helping us work on our elevator speech. You have to step out of your role as a lawyer and think about, what do I really do? How am I a business person? Because what we do as lawyers, it's, I don't know, 50% of what I do has to do with the law, maybe, and 50% is counseling, business advice, experiential, information. So for me, for my first board, I stepped out and I thought, well, I ran one of our practice sections. I ran a $60 million P&L. That, I'm a counselor and advisor to my clients, corporate governance, an M&A expert. What are the things that I can bring to the company that are valuable? Because I'm not going to be their lawyer. And it was interesting, in one interview, I had been on several nonprofits and I was on the board of the firm, and someone said, well, I see you haven't, been on the board of any for-profit businesses. And I did say, well, it's really odd, but our firm actually is focused on making a profit. We're not a nonprofit enterprise. And I didn't go on to say, and our revenue is actually 5 times yours. But there's a lot of misconceptions about what we actually do. And so I think stepping out of your day-to-day, reviewing, drafting documents type role and saying, what expertise and experience and value do I have that matters to a company? And you really have quite a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're so right about DirectWomen making sure that you don't just, come at it as a lawyer, but talk about the skill sets that you learned as a lawyer. I was a litigator, trial lawyer. I tell people all the time, I can advocate for, I can learn to understand and advocate for something or a complicated issue really quickly. I'm not a deal lawyer, but I've destroyed a lot of different deals. So I know what makes a bad contract, right? Just things like that about from your business perspective. We have a couple questions here that I think are related and really not Allison, Rachel, I'm going to come back to you on this question because you talked about the fiduciary role and the obligations of fiduciary. These questions, one of them relates to kind of what's the diligence you should put on if you've been approached by a company. What should you be thinking about from the company in terms of diligence for you getting on the board, in terms of what kind of things do you want to know about the company, how they run, how they operate, because of that fiduciary obligations. And somebody else asked a related question where they said that they wanted the board to have buy-in. It's a private company that's going to go public, and they expected the board members to invest in the company, which was interesting. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about either of those perspectives. And so Rachel, I'll start with you, and anybody else can weigh in.
So I would say you should do due diligence on a public company by reviewing their public filings and gathering any other kind of information you can about them. Usually also, if you're at the point where you're going to be asked to join the board, and I say this from the perspective of being the general counsel, and we have hired a number of directors, usually you will be given the opportunity to speak with other directors, members of management. There are lots of people who are going to talk to you before you actually join the board. So use those opportunities to learn as much as you can about the company, about the kind of people that they are. If it's a private company, I would say same thing, ask for a copy of the financials. And I already made the point about insurance. As to the other, I saw the question that you referred to, Andy. I haven't seen a situation where somebody is asked to join the board and asked to invest in the company at the same time. I will say it is not uncommon for directors and management to have some kind of minimum holding of a company's stock. So for example, we have an ownership requirement at FactSet, both for senior managers and for our directors. But usually that's a threshold that's easy to meet because you're granted options or restricted stock or something like that as a component of your compensation. So, to the person who asked the question, I'd say if you're going to be granted stock in the process and you have to hold on to it for a while, that's fine. If they're asking you to put up your own money to become a director, I will chuckle. That's what nonprofit boards do. So go find the nonprofit that you love and give them money.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So I have one last question, and I'll throw this up for any of you who feel like you want to weigh in. There are two of them that are kind of related. One is about getting, how do you get the right experience? What are the best ways to go out? And we've talked a little bit about not-for-profit boards, but are there other things? And related to that is, are there programs besides DirectWomen? This was from a woman who says she may not be quite at the level for DirectWomen yet, but are there other programs where you can go get some basic knowledge about board service? I think Deneen, you mentioned the National Association of Corporate Directors. Any other thoughts?
I also mentioned Directors Academy. I went to Stanford Directors College maybe a couple months ago. Like there are a number of programs, but I think that will help get you kind of good governance knowledge. that doesn't necessarily get you into the door. You'll make good connections while you're there. But if you're simply looking to, say, increase your knowledge of governance best practices, I think, NACD does a great job of that. I really probably DirectWomen Institute, I think, did a phenomenal job of helping us articulate how we are corporate executives versus lawyers, and dealing with I don't want to say bias, but probably a lack of desire for certain boards not to bring on lawyers, given discomfort that we might be attempting to practice law on their behalf.
Right. Okay, well, we are almost out of time, and so I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share one last piece of advice. I will tell you, we did have a question about why you sought board service, so if you can roll that into your last piece of advice too, I thought that was a great, fair question. That'd be great. So, Deneen, since you're right now on my screen, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I would think about why you want to serve on a board. What, not just what do you want and how will it fit within your life, but what do you bring to that company in helping to shepherd it through its strategy, and why is board service right for you? So I would think about it holistically.
Terrific. Allison, how about you? Last piece of advice.
So why serve on a board? I think it has to be, as Rachel was saying, ready for something new, something different, a new challenge. A way to, for me, it was, I had sat in so many board meetings. I wanted to be on the other side of the table, experience that, learn from that. My best piece of advice, I think, is to make a plan. Days pass, weeks pass, months pass, you're doing your day job, you're doing all your family stuff, and you don't get to you. And if this is something that's important to you, you have to put time into it. You have to work on your board resume. You have to take classes or join organizations if you need to do that. You need to learn, and then you need to network and put effort into it. So, make your plan, allocate X amount of time, a day, a week, a month to it. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes it falls out of the sky, but not very often.
Yeah. Rachel, how about you? Last piece of advice, and if you want to just share why you thought board service would be good for you.
So I'm going to set aside the why, because I think that most people who are on this call have a why that works for them, and I'd rather focus on the how.
Okay.
I will remind you all that just about every search firm has a board director search practice. So make sure that you reach out to the search firms that you do or have done business with. There are also a couple of major banks and accounting firms that have director search practices. So, a lot of banks, JP Morgan has it, for example, because they're trying to populate boards. So you want to make sure that you reach out to those companies and make yourself known. And then the other thing I would underscore what Allison said: network, network, network. You don't necessarily, you can't expect that it's going to come out of the sky, but you have to always be talking about it if it's something that you really want to do.
All right. Terrific. Well, thank you. Thank you for all of our panelists, Rachel, Deneen, Allison, you guys were terrific. Got some great counsel and advice there. And I think, one thing you heard, everybody, is that everybody's story is different. But people did put some work and time into thinking about what they were doing and how they were going to do it. And we would encourage you to do that. I want to thank our audience for being here, and hope that if you enjoyed this webinar, you'll come back. We have another one coming up in November, which is a view from law for partners on corporate board service. And as Allison has said, they see a lot. And so I think it could be very educational. Registration link for that program, which is free, will be sent in a follow-up email after this webinar, and can also be found on directwomen.org. As Kelsey mentioned at the very beginning, we're going to send you a brief survey. It will take less than 5 minutes, maybe less than 3 minutes. So please, please, please spend some time with giving us some feedback. It really makes a difference as we frame these programs. So thank you all very much for being here. Thanks again, Allison, Rachel, and Deneen. You were fantastic. I really appreciate it. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Great.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.